She cried when he touched her wound, never knowing his hands were shaking harder than hers. The storm had come out of nowhere, sweeping in like a sudden reminder that nature could be as unpredictable as it was unforgiving.
Emily's car sped down the winding road, the rain hammering down, slicking the road like an oily mess. The night was dark, with only the occasional flicker of lightning to briefly light the way. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles turning white. The storm had caught her off guard, but she had no choice. The small town where she lived was miles away, and the nearest shelter was still too far. Her mind was racing, thinking about everything she had to get done. A mountain of tasks at work, plans with friends that had fallen through, and a nagging feeling she couldn't shake that something wasn't quite right. In the midst of this storm, she could hardly see anything outside the car. The wipers squeaked helplessly against the downpour. She pushed them faster, trying to clear away the rain, but it felt like a losing battle. The headlights barely illuminated the road ahead, and in a split second, Emily's heart skipped a beat. There was a sharp swerve. The tires lost their grip. It all happened too quickly for her to even scream. She felt the car slide sideways, and before she could react, the world spun wildly. The vehicle twisted violently. The sound of crumpling metal and breaking glass filled the air. Everything seemed to freeze for a brief moment, and then everything rushed back in. The car slammed into something hard, a tree, she would later find out. The impact was jarring, sending waves of pain through her body. She gritted her teeth, trying to stay conscious as her head spun. The rain, now mingled with her blood, trickled down her face, blurring her vision even more. Her seatbelt had saved her, but she could feel the deep ache in her chest. She tried to move, but the pain stopped her. Panic set in. Her breathing was shallow, and it took all her strength just to keep her eyes open. She reached for the door handle, but her fingers barely moved. She couldn't remember what happened, only that something had gone horribly wrong. In that instant, she heard the sound of footsteps. Her mind, still hazy from the shock, couldn't make sense of it. Was it the storm, or someone coming to help? Breath. Through the blurry haze, she caught sight of a figure through the cracked window. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, stood outside, staring at her. His face was unreadable, his features set in a firm line as he approached. His hands were shaking as he reached for the door. Emily, barely able to make out his movements, watched as the stranger yanked the door open. A rush of cold air and rain hit her, and she shivered, a sharp pain jolting through her side as she moved.
"Are you okay?" the man asked, his voice steady but laced with concern. His voice sounded familiar somehow, but she couldn't place it.
Emily tried to speak, but her mouth felt dry.
I don't know, she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible over the rain and the wind. It hurts. The man knelt down beside her, his hands trembling as he gently touched her arm. Brow, he was checking for injuries, his fingers brushing her skin with an urgency that didn't seem to match his calm words. I'm going to help you, he said softly, trying to reassure her. Stay with me. Help is on the way. He didn't wait for her to respond. He moved quickly, his hands still shaking as he placed them on her shoulder, trying to lift her from the wreckage. Her body protested, and she gasped in pain. He winced, his expression tightening in empathy, but he didn't stop. As he helped her out of the car, Emily's world spun again. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she almost collapsed into him. He caught her gently but firmly, his arm around her waist supporting her weight. She could feel the cold of the rain soaking through her clothes, but it was nothing compared to the searing pain that seemed to be everywhere. Narration. Emily sighed, especially burned with each movement. She couldn't tell where the pain started or where it ended. It was as if her entire body was an open wound, and the storm outside had only made it worse. The man didn't seem to notice the storm. His focus was entirely on her. He kept his hand on her side, pressing gently, and she winced at the pressure. His touch was careful, as though he understood the pain without needing to be told. She felt herself becoming lighter in his arms, not physically but emotionally, as if his presence brought some form of comfort. "Hold. On now," he said again, his voice softer this time. "We're almost there." Emily's mind was spinning, and as she glanced around she realized how isolated they were. The storm had made the roads treacherous, and she couldn't hear any other cars, no sirens, no sounds of life outside the immediate vicinity. It was just the two of them in the dark, with only the rain and the trees for company. Suddenly, her eyes flickered open wide as she realized she was being carried away from the wreck. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, panic rising in her voice. She didn't know who this man was, and she didn't know if she could trust him. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, almost too quickly. "I'm just trying to get you out of here." "It's not safe. It wasn't safe for either of them." The storm was getting worse by the minute. But what choice did they have? Emily's mind was too clouded with pain to think clearly. She had no idea how long they had been walking, but she was starting to feel lightheaded. Her legs felt like lead, and the world was tilting dangerously to one side. The man's grip on her never faltered, but his arms were trembling, just as badly as his hands had been. He was trying to be steady for her, but she could feel it. He wasn't as calm as he appeared. His whole body seemed to be shaking, though he did everything he could to keep her safe. She couldn't understand why, but it was almost as if he were carrying her with the weight of his own suffering. They stopped at what seemed to be a small shelter by the side of the road. The man lowered Emily gently to the ground, his hands still shaking as he helped her sit. He knelt down beside her, breathing heavily.
"I'm here," he said again, his voice firm, but his expression betrayed a deeper emotion.
"You're going to be okay!" Emily could hardly keep her eyes open. She barely noticed when he wrapped a piece of cloth around her side, trying to stop the bleeding. His movements were precise, but his shaking hands betrayed the fear he was holding inside. Emily wanted to say something, to thank him, but her vision was blurred. She could only manage a weak "thank you" before the world seemed to fade away completely. The storm raged on, its relentless pounding against the trees and the earth around them like a loud drum. Inside the makeshift shelter, Emily's world was a blur of pain and confusion. Her mind kept flickering in and out of consciousness, each time struggling to focus on the moment. Her body ached, and the coldness of the rain that had soaked her clothes made her shiver uncontrollably. Through the haze, she could sense the man still nearby. He hadn't left her side, and his presence, though silent, was strangely comforting. She heard him breathing deeply as though trying to calm himself, but his breath sounded uneven, almost like he was carrying a weight heavier than her own injuries. Emily wanted to speak, to ask him what had happened, but her throat felt dry, and every word she tried to speak seemed to evaporate before it left her lips. Breath. She reached out with a trembling hand, not entirely sure if she was imagining it or if the man was still there. But as her fingers brushed against something solid, a wave of relief washed over her. It was real! But he was real. His rough voice broke the silence, and it was clear he was trying to make her feel safe. "You're okay," he said softly, though his words seemed to crack under the pressure of his own worry. "You're going to be okay." Help is coming! Emily didn't know if he was telling the truth, or if he was just trying to comfort her. But in that moment it didn't matter. His calmness was somehow reassuring, even though she could feel the unease in his hands as they gently touched her arm. Breath, She winced as he moved, his hands trying to adjust the cloth around her side. The pressure on the wound sent a shock of pain through her, and she gasped, feeling the world spin for a second. Breaths. "I know it hurts, but I need to stop the bleeding," he explained, his voice steady despite the clear tension in his tone. "Just hold on a little longer."
Her eyes fluttering open as she tried to make sense of what was happening.
Her mind was struggling to keep up with everything around her, but the pain was so overwhelming that it made thinking clearly difficult. All she could focus on was the warmth of the stranger's hands, which were now pressing against her side to hold the cloth in place. His hands were trembling, and Emily could feel it with each careful touch. She wanted to tell him that she was fine, that she didn't need his help, but the words wouldn't come. Her body didn't feel like her own, and every part of her was fighting to stay awake. Still, she clung to his presence, feeling a strange sense of safety in the way he had rushed to her aid without hesitation. For a moment there was only the sound of the rain, a steady rhythm against the earth. Emily's vision wavered, and she closed her eyes again, the weight of her exhaustion pulling her deeper into the dark. When she opened her eyes once more, the man was still there, kneeling beside her, his face full of concentration. She could see the faintest line of sweat on his forehead, despite the coolness of the storm. And there was a quiet determination in his eyes. "Where?" she began to ask, her voice hoarse. "Where are we?" He glanced at her, and for the first time she saw the flicker of something like fear in his expression. It wasn't for her, though, something deeper. Something he was fighting to hide. He quickly masked it with a neutral look. "We're safe for now," he answered, though his voice didn't carry the same sense of certainty it had earlier. "Help is on the way." Emily wanted to ask more questions, but she was fading again. Her head felt heavy, and her eyes closed against her will. She could hear his voice again, though it was distant now, as if the storm had grown louder in her ears. "I won't let anything happen to you," he said, his words soft but firm, like a promise. "Stay with me, okay?" She nodded weakly, unable to find the strength to speak, but his words brought a small comfort. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her from slipping too far into unconsciousness. The next time Emily came to, there was a new sound mingling with the storm. The unmistakable hum of a car engine. The sound was faint, at first, like it was far away, but it was growing louder. It was the sound of help. Emily's breath quickened. She tried to sit up, but the pain in her side hit her like a sharp knife, and she gasped in agony. The man immediately leaned over her, his hands gentle but firm as he helped her lie back down. "Take it easy," he urged, his voice strained but comforting. "Don't move too much." She nodded, trying to calm herself. The sound of the engine grew louder, and then she saw the headlights, cutting through the storm. A beacon of hope in the otherwise dark and chaotic world. Relief swept over her, but it was short-lived. The man didn't seem as relieved as she had expected him to be. He stood quickly, his body stiff, and his hands shook as he moved. Emily watched him, confused. The storm had clearly taken a toll on both of them, but his reaction was different. It was as though he was fighting something inside himself, something deeper than the storm or the situation. He took a few steps away from her, his back turned, and Emily could hear him take in a long, shaky breath. She could feel the tension radiating from him. She was sure it wasn't just the storm that was affecting him. The car finally stopped near the shelter and the door opened. Des Brown. 2 paramedics rushed out, their uniforms visible in the dim light.
"Over here!"
the man shouted, his voice hoarse. The paramedics quickly approached, their eyes assessing the scene in a practiced manner. One of them knelt beside Emily and started examining her wound, while the other moved to check her vital signs. As they worked, Emily glanced at the man who had saved her. His hands were still shaking, though he wasn't touching her anymore. round. She could see the fight in his eyes, like he was trying to hold something back. Maybe his own fear, maybe something more. The paramedics were quick to wrap Emily's wound more securely and prepare her for transport. They spoke in calm, efficient tones, asking her questions that she could barely understand. "Stay calm," one of the paramedics said. "Des." Emily wanted to say something, to thank the man who had stayed by her side all this time, but the words wouldn't come. She could barely focus on what was happening around her, and before she knew it, she was being lifted into the ambulance. The man stood at the edge of the shelter, his figure silhouetted against the storm. His hands were still shaking as he wiped his face, his body tense. "Hey!" one of the paramedics called, his voice cutting through the rain. "Are you okay?" The man didn't answer immediately. He just stood there, staring at Emily as she was loaded into the ambulance. Finally, he turned, and his gaze met the paramedics'. His face was unreadable, but his hands, they were still trembling.
"I'm fine," he muttered, though it was clear he wasn't.
As the ambulance door slammed shut, Emily caught one last glimpse of him. His figure stood motionless in the rain, watching her leave. Breath. She wanted to call out, to thank him properly, but the words stuck in her throat. She wasn't sure if she'd ever see him again, but she knew one thing for certain. The man who had saved her life was carrying a burden of his own. The ride to the hospital felt like an eternity, though it only lasted a few minutes. The sirens screamed in the background, their sharp, unyielding wail cutting through the otherwise quiet night. Breaths she took felt shallow, like she was struggling to pull air into her lungs. The world seemed distant, muted by the pain that pulsed through her body. Each time the ambulance hit a bump in the road, her side throbbed with a deep, aching burn that made her grit her teeth. She tried to focus on something, anything, to keep herself grounded. She could hear the paramedics working around her, their voices soft but urgent. She felt one of their hands on her arm, checking her pulse, while the other adjusted the bandages around her wound. Their movements were quick and practiced, but Emily could tell that they were worried too. They weren't speaking much, as if they were trying not to give her any false hope. She could barely move, but her mind was still sharp enough to catch the look in the paramedics' eyes when they glanced at each other. It wasn't just concern. It was fear. She didn't want to think about it. She wanted to stay calm. Narration. She had to. For some reason, she kept imagining the man who had saved her, though she knew nothing about him. He was a stranger, a person who had rushed to her side in the middle of a storm, and yet she felt a connection to him. Something about the way he had stayed with her, not leaving her, even when everything around them was falling apart, lingered in her thoughts. The paramedics continued to work, but Emily felt herself growing weaker with each passing moment. She could feel her body shutting down as the shock set in, a cold wave sweeping over her. She shivered uncontrollably, unable to stop it. The pain in her side was unbearable, and her eyes fluttered shut once again, the world slipping away. When she opened them again, the first thing she noticed was the bright white light above her. The sterile smell of the hospital filled her senses, and for a moment she thought she might be dreaming. The pain had dulled, though she could still feel the throbbing ache in her side, a constant reminder that she wasn't out of danger yet.
Her surroundings came into focus slowly. Shapes and faces began to emerge from the blur.
She was in a hospital room, the quiet beeping of monitors and the soft shuffle of nurses moving about the room telling her she was safe for the moment. She turned her head slightly and saw a nurse standing beside her, adjusting the IV that was feeding fluids into her arm. Great. The nurse smiled softly when she saw Emily's eyes open.
"You're awake," the nurse said gently, her voice calm and soothing.
"How are you feeling?" Emily tried to speak, but her throat felt dry, and her voice came out as a weak whisper.
"It hurts," she managed to say, her lips barely moving.
The nurse nodded understandingly. You've been through a lot.
We're giving you some medication for the pain. It'll help soon.
Emily nodded, though the movement made her dizzy. She closed her eyes again, trying to relax. But the questions began flooding her mind. Where was the man? What happened to him? She wanted to ask, to thank him, but her voice still wouldn't cooperate. She couldn't remember much of what had happened after the accident, just flashes of the man's face, his strong hands, and the way he had carried her through the storm. But those memories were starting to feel like they belonged to someone else, distant and blurry. As the hours passed, Emily drifted in and out of consciousness. The pain was manageable with the medication, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. There was a growing sense of unease in her chest, a gnawing worry that she couldn't put into words. Breaths. She knew she was lucky to be alive, but her mind kept returning to the man who had saved her. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened her eyes to see a doctor enter the room, a man in his mid-40s, his expression warm but focused. He checked the monitors beside her bed before turning to her with a gentle smile. "Good evening, miss," he said, his voice kind but professional. "How are you feeling now?" Emily tried to sit up, but stopped herself when a wave of dizziness washed over her. "Better," she said, her voice still faint. I don't remember much. The accident, I mean." The doctor nodded, his gaze softening. "It's perfectly normal. You were in shock when you arrived, but you've been stable for the last few hours. The wound on your side was pretty deep, but we've managed to stop the bleeding. But you'll need some rest, but you're going to be okay."
Emily breathed a sigh of relief, though a lingering worry still clouded her thoughts.
Psst. The man. The one who helped me. Is he okay? Was he hurt? The doctor looked at her for a moment, as if surprised by the question, but then his expression shifted to one of understanding. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "He's fine. He's not hurt. He was just a passerby, someone who happened to be nearby. He stayed with you the whole time until the paramedics arrived." "I'm sure he did everything he could." Emily felt a flutter of relief in her chest, but it was fleeting. There was still something unresolved inside her. She wanted to see him, to thank him, but she couldn't explain why it mattered so much. The doctor's voice broke through her thoughts. "I understand you're worried about him, but he left shortly after the paramedics took over. He didn't want to be a bother."
He was pretty shaken up himself, though. Shaken up? Emily repeated, her brow furrowing.
"Why?" The doctor hesitated for a moment before answering. "The man who helped you? He seemed fine when he was with you, but we think he might have been dealing with something personal. A lot of people who've been through traumatic experiences sometimes don't show it immediately. He was very calm while he was with you, but he didn't stay long after." Breaths. Emily's mind raced. What had happened to him? Why had he left so quickly? She couldn't shake the image of his hands shaking, his face filled with tension. "Brah!" She wanted to know more, but the doctor didn't seem to have any answers. "I see," Emily whispered, her voice quiet. Bert. She felt a pang of sadness, not just for herself, but for him too. He had been there for her when she needed him most, and now he was gone without a trace. The doctor smiled gently. "Rest now. You've been through a lot. You'll need time to heal." Emily nodded, her eyes heavy again. As the doctor left the room, she closed her eyes and let the exhaustion take over. The feeling of his hands, trembling and warm, stayed with her in the back of her mind. She could still feel the pressure he had applied to her side, his touch so careful, yet so full of an emotion she couldn't quite understand. In the quiet darkness of her hospital room, Emily drifted into a restless sleep, but she didn't know when or if she would see him again. But something inside her told her that their paths had crossed for a reason. She wasn't sure what that reason was, but she knew that she couldn't forget him. Not ever. The soft beeping of the hospital monitors was the only sound that filled the room as Emily tried to make sense of everything that had happened. Her body felt heavy, her side still aching, but the pain was beginning to fade into a dull throb with each passing minute. It had been hours since the accident, and she could still feel the tremor in her hands as she lightly touched the bandages around her waist. The doctors had told her that the wound was serious, but that she was lucky. They had done their best to stop the bleeding and ensure that she would recover, but it was clear that this would be a long process. Emily turned her head, staring out of the small window at the dark sky. The rain had stopped, and the clouds had begun to part, revealing a faint sliver of the moon. The storm that had nearly claimed her life was now a distant memory, though she couldn't shake the feeling that it had left something behind, something inside her that wasn't quite right. Bait. As much as she tried to focus on the present, her thoughts kept drifting back to the man, the one who had found her in the storm. His hands trembling as he held her, his voice, so soft yet so urgent. She couldn't forget him. She hadn't even asked his name.
Why hadn't he stayed longer? The paramedics had arrived soon after, and he had disappeared into the night without a trace.
Emily tried to remember his face, but it was like trying to recall a dream that was already slipping away. All she could remember was the calmness in his eyes as he helped her, and the way his hands had shaken in a way that felt like more than just the cold rain. It was as though something inside him had been broken, like he was carrying a weight that was heavier than the storm itself. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. The nurse who had been caring for her entered, a warm smile on her face. She was holding a small clipboard in her hands and had a kind, reassuring presence that seemed to make the room feel a little less sterile.
"Good evening, Emily," the nurse said gently. "How are you feeling now?" Emily shifted slightly in her bed, still not quite used to the feeling of being in the hospital.
"Dan, better," she replied softly. "It doesn't hurt as much." "That's good to hear," the nurse said, glancing at the monitors beside the bed. "The doctor just left, but he said you're making great progress. We'll continue to monitor your recovery, but everything looks good for now." Emily nodded but felt a lingering unease. There was still something she needed to know.
"Can you tell me about the man?"
she asked, her voice barely above a whisper.
"The one who helped me?" The nurse's expression shifted slightly, and Emily could tell that the question caught her off guard.
For a moment, she seemed to hesitate before speaking. Yes," the nurse said softly.
He didn't stay long after the paramedics arrived, but he was very helpful. He made sure you were stable, but when the ambulance got there, he didn't want to delay them.
"I think he was just trying to make sure you were okay." Emily frowned, trying to piece together the information.
"But he didn't stay to see if I was all right? He just left?" The nurse's face softened. "He seemed to be in a hurry. He didn't want to cause any trouble, and honestly, I think he was just as shaken up by the situation as you were." Emily's brow furrowed. Something about the man's action didn't sit right with her. She could sense that there was more to his story, but no one seemed to know anything about him. Brit. He had come out of nowhere, helped her, and then disappeared without a trace.
"What did he look like?" Emily asked, trying to recall any detail she might have missed.
"Tall," the nurse said, her voice thoughtful. "Probably in his 30s or early 40s. Bed. Strong build. Not sure about his exact age, but he looked like he could handle a lot." Emily's mind raced. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A tall man in his 30s or 40s, strong and calm under pressure. It was almost like she could see him again in her mind, his serious expression as he helped her through the worst moment of her life.
Did he say anything?
Emily asked. The nurse hesitated.
Not much. He was mostly focused on getting you help.
He kept saying you were going to be okay and that he wouldn't leave you until the paramedics arrived.
Emily sighed, her mind still restless.
Did he seem upset or shaken?
He didn't seem like the kind of person to show much emotion, but yes, I could tell something was off. He didn't stay for long, and when he left, he looked like he had his own battles to fight.
Emily didn't know what that meant, but something about the nurse's words rang true. It was clear that the man had been carrying something heavy. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was running from something, or perhaps trying to escape his past. The nurse's voice broke through her thoughts. Breath. I know you're curious about him, but I'm afraid we don't have much information. What? He didn't leave a name and he didn't stick around for us to get one. I'm sorry. Bray.
It's okay, Emily said quietly, though the frustration in her voice was clear. I just want to know if he's all right.
I understand, but right now you need to focus on getting better.
That's the most important thing. Emily nodded, though her mind was far from at ease. She wanted to know everything about the man who had saved her, but there was no way to track him down. He had left without a trace, disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. After the nurse left the room, Emily lay back against her pillows trying to rest. But sleep didn't come easily. Her mind kept circling back to the man, to his trembling hands and the look in his eyes. She couldn't let it go. Hours passed, and Emily finally managed to doze off, though the dreams she had were fragmented and unclear. She dreamed of dark, stormy skies and the sound of heavy rain pounding on the windows. In the dream, the man was there, standing in the rain, his hands shaking as he reached for her. But every time she tried to speak, the words wouldn't come, and the storm would roar louder, drowning out everything else. When Emily woke again, the sun had started to rise, casting a pale light over the hospital room. She was still tired, but something about the quiet of the morning made her feel more at peace. The storm was over. The world outside was calmer now, and she felt herself beginning to heal, both physically and emotionally. But she couldn't stop thinking about the man. There was something unfinished, something unspoken between them. But she didn't know if she would ever see him again, but she felt a connection to him that she couldn't explain. It was like they had shared something, a moment of survival, a shared struggle that neither of them could put into words. As the day wore on, Emily's thoughts wandered back to him again. She didn't know why he had left so quickly, why he hadn't stayed to make sure she was okay, but she couldn't help but wonder if he was still out there, fighting his own battles, just as she had fought hers. The days passed slowly, and Emily found herself in a routine she didn't quite recognize. She woke up to the soft beeping of the hospital monitors, the scent of antiseptic in the air, and the warmth of the blankets tucked around her. Each day felt like it was stretching on forever, and though her body was healing, her mind was still restless. The accident, the storm, the man. Everything swirled in her thoughts like a whirlpool, and no matter how hard she tried to focus on the present, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something unfinished. Her side still ached, though the sharp pain had been replaced with a dull, constant throb that reminded her every moment of the crash.
But it wasn't just the physical pain that bothered her. It was the emotional weight of the whole experience.
She couldn't forget the way she had felt when she woke up in the ambulance, the fear that had gripped her chest as she wondered whether she would survive. But there was also something else, something that lingered every time she closed her eyes. The man. His face was still a blur in her memory, but the image of his trembling hands. The way he had held her, steady and strong but with a quiet desperation, haunted her. She kept replaying the moment over and over in her mind as if she could piece together the puzzle of who he was, what had driven him to help her in the first place, and why he had left so suddenly. She couldn't explain why it mattered so much. After all, he was just a stranger, someone she would never have met if not for the accident. But there was a connection, however brief, that had formed between them. It wasn't just about survival. It was about something deeper. Something unspoken. She could feel it in the way he had looked at her, as though she was just as important as he was, even in the midst of chaos. Emily tried to push the thoughts away. She couldn't afford to focus on the unknown, on someone she might never see again. She had to heal, had to move forward. But the pull of the mystery was strong, and it tugged at her with every passing day.
A week after the accident, Emily was finally cleared to leave the hospital.
Her wound had healed well, and the doctors were confident she would make a full recovery. As she sat on the edge of the bed ready to go home, she found herself staring out the window again. The sun was bright, the sky clear, and for the first time since the crash, Emily felt a glimmer of peace. But even then, the nagging feeling didn't go away. G had a sense that something was still waiting for her, something she had to confront before she could truly move on. Her family had been by her side throughout the entire process, and as she packed her things, her mother came into the room, a concerned look on her face.
"Are you sure you're ready to go home?"
her mother asked softly, her voice full of worry.
Emily smiled faintly.
"I think so. I just need some time to rest. It's been a lot to process. Bay." Her mother nodded, sitting down beside her. "I understand, but you can talk to me if you need to. You've been through a lot, and it's okay if it takes time to get back to normal."
"I know," Emily replied, her voice gentle.
"I'm just trying to figure things out." Her mother gave her a reassuring smile. "You don't have to have it all figured out right now. One day at a time, remember?" Emily nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Her mother was right. She didn't have to figure everything out all at once. She could take her time to heal, to rebuild her life, and to process everything that had happened. And maybe, just maybe, if the man was meant to be a part of her life, their paths would cross again someday. When she was finally discharged, Emily left the hospital with a mix of relief and uncertainty. The world outside seemed brighter, but the shadows of the storm still clung to her. Her thoughts were still tangled in the memory of the accident, and as she drove home, the streets seemed unfamiliar, like a place she had never truly known. The crash had changed everything, and though she was physically recovering, her mind was still trying to catch up.
Over the next few days, Emily focused on getting back to her routine.
She spent time with her family, took long walks in the park to clear her head, and tried to get back to work. But every time she tried to move forward, she found herself thinking about the man who had helped her. What had happened to him? Why had he left without saying a word? One afternoon, as Emily sat at her kitchen table sipping a cup of tea, she picked up the phone and dialed the number the hospital had given her. It was a long shot, but she needed to know more. She needed to find out if there was any way to track down the man who had saved her life.
The receptionist answered after a few rings.
"Good afternoon. This is St. Michael's Hospital." "How can I assist you?" "Hi," Emily said, her voice steady but nervous. "I was hoping you could help me with something." "I was in an accident last week, and a man helped me before the paramedics arrived. I was wondering if there's any way to find out who he is." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Emily's heart began to race. She could feel the tension rising in her chest. But finally the receptionist spoke.
I'm sorry, ma'am, but due to privacy policies, we can't release any information about individuals who weren't admitted to the hospital.
We don't have any record of his name if he left before our team arrived.
Emily felt a wave of disappointment wash over her. She had hoped that there might be some way to learn more, but it seemed like it wasn't meant to be.
She thanked the receptionist and hung up the phone, her shoulders slumping. She tried to push the thoughts of the man from her mind, but it was impossible. She had to know more. She had to find him. Something in her told her that their story wasn't finished, that there was still more to the connection they had shared in those moments of crisis. And then, just as Emily was about to give up, she received a letter.
It came in the mail, addressed to her name in neat, careful handwriting. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened the envelope, wondering who could be sending her something.
Inside, she found a simple note. I know you probably won't understand why I did what I did, but I had to help you, even if it meant walking away. Some things are too painful to explain, and some scars run deeper than others.
Please don't look for me. I'm not the person you think I am.
But I'm glad you're okay. Take care of yourself. The letter was signed with just an initial, J. Emily stared at the words for a long time, the weight of the message settling over her. She didn't know who J was, but she understood the pain in those words. He had been carrying something too heavy to share. But he had helped her when she needed it the most. He had been there, even when he didn't have to be. And as she read the letter again, Emily felt a sense of peace. She might never see him again, and that was okay. Pretend. Some stories weren't meant to be fully understood. But in that moment, she realized that the connection they had shared, however brief, had changed her. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her drawer. She wasn't sure if she would ever know the full story of the man who had saved her, but she was no longer searching for answers. Sometimes healing didn't come with a clear explanation. Sometimes it came with a moment of grace, a moment when someone stepped into your life for just a moment and changed everything, and that was enough.